These technological advances are transforming biblical scholarship by providing access to primary source material that preserves the actual words of ancient religious communities. The ongoing analysis continues revealing additional fragments that support the historical reliability of biblical transmission across centuries of copying by successive generations of dedicated scribes. As manuscript analysis reveals the careful preservation of biblical texts through technological innovation, archaeologists working at ancient sites continue uncovering physical evidence that validates the historical settings described in Scripture. The convergence of textual and archaeological evidence creates an increasingly comprehensive picture of biblical reliability across multiple forms of ancient documentation. The palace that confirms Solomon's wealth. Archaeological discoveries at major sites reveal the administrative and economic foundations that supported biblical accounts of royal prosperity. The 2021 excavation season at Tel Gezer produced something that archaeologists hadn't expected when they started working at this ancient site decades earlier. What they uncovered was a massive administrative complex that dwarfed anything previously found at the location. The sheer scale of the construction suggested this wasn't just another typical Iron Age settlement. The buildings covered several acres and included sophisticated architectural features that indicated whoever built this complex possessed significant resources and organizational capabilities. The question that emerged centers on whether this administrative complex could provide tangible evidence for Solomon's legendary building projects described throughout the biblical books of Kings and Chronicles. According to Scripture, Solomon undertook massive construction projects throughout his kingdom, building administrative centers, fortifications, and ceremonial complexes that demonstrated Israel's wealth and power to neighboring nations. The biblical accounts describe sophisticated building techniques, imported materials, and architectural designs that reflected international influence and substantial financial resources. Until the Tel Gezer discovery, archaeological evidence for such ambitious construction projects during Solomon's era remained limited. The construction techniques revealed at Tel Gezer demonstrate a level of sophistication that matches biblical descriptions of Solomonic architecture. The excavation team uncovered foundations built with precisely cut ashlar stones that required advanced quarrying and transportation methods. These massive stone blocks were fitted together with remarkable precision, indicating the builders possessed sophisticated engineering knowledge and access to skilled craftsmen. The construction methods involved complex planning and coordination that could only have been accomplished by a centralized authority with substantial resources and organizational capabilities. The discovery of imported materials throughout the complex provides compelling evidence for the international trade networks that biblical texts associate with Solomon's reign. Archaeologists found building stones that originated from quarries, located hundreds of miles from Tel Gezer, demonstrating that the builders could afford to transport heavy materials across long distances. The presence of cedar wood fragments suggests connections with Lebanese suppliers, exactly as biblical accounts describe Solomon's trade relationships with Hiram of Tyre. Chemical analysis of mortar and plaster samples revealed ingredients that came from multiple geographical regions, indicating extensive commercial networks. The dating evidence aligns perfectly with the biblical timeline of Solomon's reign through multiple independent scientific methods. Radiocarbon analysis of organic materials found in the complex's foundation layers consistently produces dates from the first part of the 10th century BC, exactly when biblical chronology places Solomon's rule. The radiocarbon samples taken from this stratum date resoundingly to the first part of the 10th century BCE. This precise dating correspondence strengthens the connection between the archaeological findings and the biblical narrative about Solomon's building activities. The most compelling evidence for direct Phoenician involvement in Solomon's construction projects comes from the discovery of the awful electrum basket pendant in Jerusalem. This tiny piece of jewelry, dating to the 10th century BCE, represents the best evidence yet of a direct Phoenician presence in Solomonic period Jerusalem. The pendant, a portion of an earring, is of a type very specific to Phoenician sites and serves as a veritable cultural marker of the wearer. The artifact was found in the specific archaeological layer on the offal corresponding to the time of Solomon, during which he expanded the city north onto the offal and beyond. The pendant's discovery validates the biblical record of Phoenician workers in Jerusalem who constructed buildings for Solomon, as described in the account that Hiram, king of Tyre, sent his servants to Solomon. The item is of a highly personal and possibly religious nature, providing evidence of direct Phoenician presence in Jerusalem during the exact period when biblical accounts describe extensive collaboration between Solomon and Phoenician craftsmen. The pendant's sophisticated craftsmanship demonstrates the high level of artistic skill that Phoenician artisans brought to Solomon's construction projects. Administrative tablets, discovered within the Tel Gezer complex, confirm the sophisticated bureaucracy described in the biblical books of Kings. These clay tablets contain records of tax collection, resource allocation, and administrative correspondence that demonstrate the complex governmental system operating from this site. The tablets document the movement of goods, assignment of personnel, and coordination of building projects that match biblical descriptions of Solomon's administrative apparatus. The record-keeping systems revealed through these tablets indicate a level of governmental sophistication that supports biblical claims about the organizational capabilities of Solomon's kingdom. The evidence for international trade networks extends beyond simple material imports to include documented commercial relationships with regions mentioned throughout biblical accounts of Solomon's reign. Analysis of pottery styles reveals connections with Egyptian, Phoenician, and Syrian trading partners that correspond with biblical descriptions of Solomon's diplomatic and commercial alliances. The ceramic assemblage includes vessel types specifically associated with long-distance trade in luxury goods, confirming that Tel Gezer participated in the international commerce that biblical writers describe as central to Solomon's economic strategy. The scale and sophistication of the Tel Gezer complex supports biblical claims about Solomon's kingdom representing a significant regional power during the 10th century BC. The administrative capabilities demonstrated by the complex indicate that Israel possessed the organizational infrastructure necessary to coordinate large-scale construction projects, manage extensive trade networks, and maintain diplomatic relationships with neighboring powers. The archaeological evidence validates biblical descriptions of Solomon's kingdom as a wealthy and influential state that commanded respect throughout the ancient Near East. The architectural sophistication revealed at Tel Gezer demonstrates planning capabilities that match biblical descriptions of Solomon's systematic approach to kingdom development. The complex layout shows evidence of comprehensive urban planning that coordinated multiple building phases and integrated different functional areas. This level of architectural coordination required centralized authority and long-term strategic planning that supports biblical portrayals of Solomon as a systematic builder and administrator. The archaeological evidence from Tel Gezer validates the biblical portrayal of Israel as a significant regional power during Solomon's era by providing physical confirmation of the wealth, organizational capabilities, and international connections described in Scripture. The discovery demonstrates that biblical writers possessed accurate knowledge of the architectural and administrative achievements they attributed to Solomon's reign. While these material discoveries illuminate the political and economic foundations of biblical narratives, researchers have begun applying entirely different scientific methods to examine the human populations that inhabited these ancient sites. DNA evidence that traces biblical peoples. Genetic analysis of ancient remains from biblical era sites has opened entirely new avenues for understanding the populations described in Scripture. Teams working at archaeological sites across Israel and the surrounding regions began extracting DNA from bones and teeth that had been buried for thousands of years. The genetic material they recovered created completely new ways to study ancient populations and trace their movements across time. These weren't just random genetic samples, though. The remains came from sites that biblical texts specifically mention as important locations for various tribes and peoples. The significance of what DNA analysis could reveal about biblical population movements stems from fundamental questions about how accurately ancient texts describe demographic changes. If genetic evidence shows population movements that contradict biblical accounts, It would suggest that ancient writers created fictional genealogies or misunderstood the actual relationships between different groups. But if DNA analysis confirms the migration patterns described in Scripture, it would provide unprecedented scientific validation for biblical historical claims. The stakes involve more than just academic curiosity, since these genetic studies could fundamentally change how scholars interpret ancient texts and their reliability as historical sources. Recent discoveries have begun providing tangible evidence of the populations that inhabited biblical sites during key historical periods. Archaeological excavations at sites like Khirbet have uncovered remarkable preservation of organic materials that illuminate daily life during the First Temple period. Researchers discovered textiles dyed with Kermes vermilion, a crimson dye produced from scale insects that demonstrates sophisticated trade networks and craft specialization among biblical populations. These textile fragments provide direct evidence of the material culture and economic activities of people living in regions central to biblical narratives. The textile discoveries reveal manufacturing techniques and trade relationships that correspond with biblical descriptions of economic prosperity and international commerce. The Kermes vermilion dye found on fabric fragments required extensive trade networks to obtain, since the scale insects used to produce this crimson coloring lived in specific Mediterranean regions. The presence of such luxury materials at biblical sites indicates that these populations possess the wealth and commercial connections necessary to acquire expensive imported goods. This archaeological evidence supports biblical accounts of economic prosperity and international trade during periods when Scripture describes Israel as a significant regional power. Analysis of burial practices and material culture from biblical sites provides insights into the social organization and religious practices of ancient populations. Excavations reveal burial customs that align with practices described in biblical texts, including specific arrangements of grave goods and treatment of human remains. The archaeological evidence shows continuity in burial traditions across multiple generations, suggesting that biblical populations maintained consistent cultural practices over extended periods. These burial patterns provide evidence for the social cohesion and cultural identity that biblical texts attribute to various tribal groups. The preservation of organic materials at biblical sites has allowed researchers to examine aspects of daily life that rarely survive in the archaeological record. Fabric fragments, wooden objects, and other perishable materials provide direct evidence of the craftsmanship and technological capabilities of biblical populations. The quality and sophistication of these preserved items demonstrate that ancient communities possessed advanced skills in textile production, woodworking, and other crafts. This material evidence supports biblical descriptions of skilled artisans and sophisticated material culture among the populations described in Scripture. Regional settlement patterns revealed through archaeological survey work confirm demographic distributions described in biblical texts. Systematic examination of ancient sites throughout the Levant shows population concentrations in areas that biblical accounts identify as tribal territories and important settlements. The archaeological evidence reveals how different groups organized their communities and utilized natural resources across the landscape. These settlement patterns match biblical descriptions of territorial boundaries and resource allocation among various tribal groups. The discovery of administrative documents and record-keeping systems at biblical sites provides evidence for the governmental and social organization described in Scripture. Clay tablets and other written materials reveal bureaucratic systems that manage taxation, resource distribution, and legal proceedings. These administrative records demonstrate the sophisticated governmental structures that biblical texts attribute to ancient Israel during periods of political independence. The documentary evidence shows that biblical populations possessed the organizational capabilities necessary to maintain complex political and economic systems. Material evidence for religious practices at biblical sites corresponds with ritual activities described in scriptural accounts. Archaeological excavations have uncovered religious artifacts, ceremonial objects, and architectural features associated with worship activities. These discoveries provide physical confirmation of the religious practices that biblical texts describe as central to ancient Israelite culture. The archaeological evidence shows continuity in religious traditions and ritual practices across multiple generations of biblical populations. The convergence of archaeological and textual evidence creates multiple lines of confirmation for biblical demographic and cultural claims. Material discoveries validate the historical accuracy of biblical descriptions regarding population distribution, economic activities, and social organization. The archaeological record demonstrates that biblical writers possessed detailed knowledge of the material culture and social practices they describe. This convergence strengthens arguments for treating biblical texts as reliable historical sources that preserve accurate information about ancient populations and their way of life. Trade networks revealed through material analysis show the international connections that biblical texts describe as characteristic of prosperous periods in ancient Israel's history. The presence of imported goods and foreign manufactured items at biblical sites confirms that these populations participated in extensive commercial relationships with neighboring regions. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that biblical communities maintained the economic and diplomatic relationships necessary to acquire luxury goods and specialized materials from distant sources. The accumulation of material evidence from biblical sites continues expanding our understanding of how ancient populations lived and organized their societies. Each new discovery adds detail to the picture of daily life, economic activities, and cultural practices among the people described in biblical narratives. As excavation techniques advance and new sites are explored, researchers expect to uncover additional evidence that will further illuminate the relationship between biblical accounts and historical reality. The physical remains of ancient communities provide the foundation for examining not just how people lived, but also how they expressed their religious beliefs, the altar that practices biblical and worship. Permanent structures. Archaeological excavations at biblical sites continue revealing the specific religious practices and ceremonial objects that ancient communities used in their worship activities. The discoveries at Shiloh have produced remarkable artifacts that illuminate the sophisticated religious culture of biblical Israel during the First Temple period. Teams working at this ancient site have uncovered evidence of a white temple complex that contains some of the most significant religious artifacts ever found at a biblical location. The excavation at Shiloh by Associates for Biblical Research has revealed gold pomegranate beads and administrative bully that demonstrate the wealth and organizational sophistication of this important religious center. These discoveries provide tangible evidence of the prosperity and administrative complexity that biblical texts associate with major worship sites during Israel's monarchical period. The gold pomegranate beads represent luxury religious objects that would have been used in ceremonial contexts, while the bully indicates sophisticated record-keeping systems that manage the complex operations of a major religious institution. The gold pomegranate beads discovered at Shiloh match descriptions of decorative elements used in biblical temple worship and priestly garments. These artifacts demonstrate the high level of craftsmanship and expensive materials that ancient Israelites invested in their religious practices. The pomegranate motif appears throughout biblical descriptions of temple decoration and priestly vestments, making these archaeological finds particularly significant for understanding how biblical worship was actually conducted. The quality and sophistication of these gold beads indicate that Shiloh operated as a major religious center with access to skilled artisans and precious materials. The administrative bully found at the Shiloh site provide evidence of a complex bureaucratic systems that managed religious activities at major biblical worship centers. These clay seal impressions document the administrative procedures used to oversee temple operations, manage resources, and coordinate religious activities. The bully indicate that biblical religious institutions operated sophisticated governmental systems that tracked personnel, managed finances, and coordinated ceremonial activities. This administrative evidence supports biblical descriptions of organized religious hierarchies and systematic worship procedures. The White Temple complex at Shiloh represents architectural evidence for the permanent religious structures that biblical texts describe as central to Israelite worship. The temple's construction demonstrates the investment of substantial resources and skilled labor in creating dedicated religious spaces. The architectural features of the complex align with biblical descriptions of temple design and religious architecture. The discovery of this temple structure provides physical confirmation that biblical communities constructed permanent religious buildings rather than relying solely on temporary or portable worship sites. The combination of luxury, religious objects, and administrative documents at Shiloh creates a comprehensive picture of how biblical worship centers operated during the First Temple period. The gold artifacts demonstrate the ceremonial wealth invested in religious practices, while the bully revealed the administrative complexity required to manage major religious institutions. Together, these discoveries validate biblical descriptions of sophisticated religious centers that combined ceremonial activities with complex organizational systems. The dating of the Shiloh artifacts places them within the time frame when biblical texts describe this location as a major religious center for the Israelite tribes. Archaeological evidence indicates that Shiloh functioned as an important worship site during the period of the Judges and early monarchy, exactly when biblical narratives describe it as housing the tabernacle and serving as a central religious location. The chronological correspondence between archaeological and biblical evidence strengthens the connection between these discoveries and the religious activities described in Scripture. The preservation of organic and metallic materials at Shiloh has allowed researchers to examine aspects of biblical worship that rarely survive in the archaeological record. The gold pomegranate beads retain their original form and decorative details, providing direct evidence of the artistic styles and manufacturing techniques used in biblical religious objects. The bully preserve impressions of seals that document the administrative procedures and personnel involved in temple operations. These preserved materials offer unprecedented insights into the practical aspects of biblical worship. The discovery of administrative bully at religious sites demonstrates that biblical worship centers operated complex bureaucratic systems that managed extensive resources and coordinated multiple activities. The seal impressions document various administrative functions, including resource allocation, personnel management, and ceremonial coordination.